The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the Wells Fargo office in Austin, Texas, and Felicity Turner stepped down onto the dusty street with her heart hammering against her ribs, wondering if the man who had sent for her would take one look at the extra passengers and send them all packing back to Boston on the next stage out. The August heat of 1879 pressed down like a heavy blanket, so different from the coastal breezes she had known all her life, and she reached up to help her mother, Martha, descend from the coach while their dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Buttons, yipped excitedly from inside his traveling crate. "Easy now, Mama," Felicity said softly, steadying her mother's elbow as the older woman's feet found solid ground. Martha Turner was only 48 but looked older, the hard years of widowhood and poverty having carved lines into her once pretty face. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped Felicity's arm, whether from the journey or from fear of what awaited them. Felicity could not say. The driver handed down their meager collection of bags and the wooden crate containing Buttons, who whined and scratched at the slats. Felicity paid the man from her dwindling coin purse, and then stood there in the middle of the street, scanning the faces of the men who had gathered to watch the stage's arrival. Her letter to Ezra Yates had been honest about most things: her age of 22, her experience keeping house, her skills with a needle and in a kitchen. But she had not mentioned that she would be bringing her widowed mother and the family dog. How could she have written such a thing when he might have canceled the arrangement entirely, and they would have been left with nothing, no prospects, no future, just the slow slide into destitution that had been swallowing them whole back in Boston? A tall man separated himself from the cluster near the saloon and walked toward her with long, purposeful strides. He wore dusty boots, dark trousers, and a blue shirt that had seen better days, and his hat was pulled low over his eyes against the brutal sun. Something in Felicity's chest tightened as he approached, and she found herself smoothing down her travel-worn skirts with nervous hands. "Miss Turner." His voice was deep, rough around the edges like it did not get used for pleasantries very often. He pushed his hat back, and she saw his face fully for the first time, sun-weathered and strong-jawed, with dark eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, though the outdoor life might have aged him beyond his years. "Yes," she managed, her throat dry. "Mr. Yates." "Ezra," he said simply. His gaze moved from her to Martha, then down to the crate where Buttons had started barking at the sound of voices. Something shifted in his expression, but Felicity could not read it. She braced herself for anger, for rejection, for the humiliation of having to beg for stage fare back east. "I should have written," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I should have told you, but Mama has no one else, and I could not leave her behind, and Buttons has been with our family since I was a girl. And I know this is not what you expected, but please, if you would just give us a chance, we will work hard, both of us. We will earn our keep and more. I promise you that." Ezra held up one hand and she fell silent, her heart sinking. This was it. He would turn them away, and what would they do then? They had barely enough money left for food, let alone passage home. "House is big enough for all," he said. Felicity blinked, certain she had misheard. "What?" "My place, it is big enough." He bent and picked up two of their bags as if they weighed nothing. "Built it to hold a family. Been just me rattling around in there for 2 years now. Your mama is welcome, and the dog too, I suppose, long as he does not chase the chickens." Relief flooded through Felicity so suddenly that her knees went weak. Martha made a small sound beside her, something between a sob and a laugh, and reached out to squeeze her daughter's hand. Buttons barked again, as if adding his own thanks. "Thank you," Felicity whispered. "Mr. Yates, I cannot tell you what this means." "Ezra," he repeated, He looked at Martha and touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, welcome to Austin. Let me get you all out of this sun." He loaded their belongings into a sturdy wagon that waited nearby, then helped both women up onto the bench seat. He set Button's crate in the back, and Felicity heard the dog settling down, panting in the heat. Ezra climbed up beside her, taking the reins, and she was acutely aware of how close he sat, his shoulder nearly brushing hers as he guided the horses down the wide main street. Austin was larger than she had expected, with two-story buildings lining the thoroughfare, painted signs advertising everything from dry goods to legal services. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, women in bonnets and men in work clothes, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. The smell of horse and dust mixed with wood smoke and something savory that made Felicity's stomach growl, reminding her that they had not eaten since early morning. "Town has grown considerable in the last few years," Ezra said, as if feeling the need to fill the silence. "Railroad came through in '71, brought a lot of people. Good for business, I suppose." "What business are you in, Mr. Yates?" Martha asked from Felicity's other side. Her voice was thin but determined, the voice of a woman who had learned to be cautious. "Ezra, please, madam." "I run cattle. Got about 300 head right now on land about 5 miles north of town. Do some horse breaking too when folks need it. Make a decent living." He glanced at Felicity, then back at the road. "Enough to support a family, I mean to say." "That is good to hear," Martha said quietly. Felicity felt her mother relax slightly against her. They rode out of town and into open country, where the land rolled away in all directions under the merciless blue sky. Mesquite trees dotted the landscape, their twisted shapes casting small patches of shade, and in the distance, Felicity could see hills rising purple and hazy in the heat. It was so different from everything she knew, so wild and vast and empty, that for a moment she felt dizzy with the strangeness of it all. Ezra's house appeared gradually as they came over a rise, a solid 2-story structure built of blonde stone and dark wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. There was a barn nearby, painted red and in good repair, and several other outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch. Fences marked out pastures where cattle grazed, and she could see a vegetable garden on the sunny side of the house, though it looked somewhat neglected. "It is beautiful," Felicity said without thinking, and then felt foolish, but Ezra's face softened at the words. "It is home," he said simply. He pulled the wagon up near the front steps and set the brake, then jumped down and came around to help them descend. His hands were strong and calloused when he took Felicity's elbow, steadying her, and she felt a strange flutter in her stomach at his touch. The inside of the house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside, and Felicity's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a large front room with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture that had clearly been made by hand, and windows that let in light but kept out the worst of the sun. There was a layer of dust over everything and the floor needed sweeping, but the bones of the place were good, solid, built to last. "Kitchen is through there," Ezra said, pointing to a doorway. 3 bedrooms upstairs. "I have been using the one at the front, but I can move my things to the back room, give you ladies the bigger spaces." "That is not necessary," Martha began, but Ezra shook his head. "It is done. Let me show you up and you can rest from the journey. I will bring your things." He led them up a narrow staircase to the second floor, where indeed 3 bedrooms opened off a small landing. The front room was large, with windows facing south, and a big bed covered in a quilt that had clearly been made by a woman's hands. Felicity wondered briefly who had made it, if Ezra had been married before, but she pushed the thought away as none of her business. "Mama, you take this one," she said quickly. "I will be fine in one of the smaller rooms." "Felicity, I could not," Martha protested, but she was swaying on her feet, exhausted from days of travel. "You can and you will," Felicity said firmly. "Come now, lie down before you fall down." Ezra brought up their bags while Felicity helped her mother out of her traveling dress and into a nightgown, then tucked her into the big bed. Martha's eyes were already closing as her head touched the pillow, and within moments she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Felicity tiptoed out and found Ezra waiting on the landing, her own smaller bag in his hand. "The room on the left has good light in the mornings," he said quietly, mindful of the sleeping woman behind them. "Thank you." She took the bag from him, their fingers brushing, and again that strange flutter in her stomach. "For everything. I know this is not what you bargained for." "A man makes his choices," Ezra said. He looked at her steadily, and she could not look away from his dark eyes. "I chose to send for a wife because I was lonely, and because this house feels empty with just me in it. You chose to come, and you brought your family, and that tells me something about your character. Seems to me we might do well together if we are both willing to try." "I am willing," Felicity said softly. "I want to make this work, Ezra, I truly do. Then that is a start." He stepped back, giving her space. "Get yourself settled. I will tend to the dog and get started on supper. Come down when you are ready." She watched him descend the stairs, his boots heavy on the wooden steps, and then went into the small bedroom he had indicated. It was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. The window looked out over the back of the property, and she could see the barn and pastures stretching away into the distance. She set her bag on the bed and sank down beside it, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the space of an hour. She had done it. She had brought Mama and Buttons across half a continent on little more than a hope and a prayer, and somehow, miraculously, they had not been turned away. Ezra Yates had taken one look at the three of them and said the house was big enough for all, and in those words, Felicity had heard something she had not dared to expect: kindness, understanding, maybe even the beginning of something that could grow into affection, given time. She stood and smoothed her hair, splashed water from the pitcher on her face, and changed into a fresh dress, one of the two good ones she owned. Then she went downstairs to find her future husband and see what life on a Texas cattle ranch might hold. Ezra was in the kitchen, a large room with a cast iron stove, a sturdy table, and shelves lined with supplies. Buttons sat at his feet, tail wagging furiously, already won over by whatever Ezra had fed him. The cowboy was slicing potatoes with swift, efficient movements, and he looked up when she entered. "Your dog has decided we are friends," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Buttons has always been a poor judge of character," Felicity replied, then caught herself. "I mean, not that you are, I only meant that he is very friendly and trusts too easily." Ezra's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "I took your meaning. Can you cook, or was that something you put in the letter to make yourself sound good?" "I can cook," she said, moving to stand beside him. "What are you making?" Beef stew was the plan. "There is meat in the cold box out back, and I have got vegetables from the garden such as it is. Not much of a hand with growing things, I am afraid." "Then perhaps that can be my contribution." She reached for a second knife and began helping him with the potatoes. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of blades against cutting boards and Buttons' contented panting. "How long have you had the ranch?" Felicity asked after a time. "Bought the land 4 years ago, built the house 3 years back. Been building the herd since then. It is slow work, but good work." He gathered up the sliced potatoes and dumped them into a large pot. "Your turn. Why did a woman like you need to become a mail-order bride? You are pretty enough and clearly educated. Seems like you would have had prospects back east. Felicity felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment, casual as it was. My father died 2 years ago. He was a clerk, and we lived modestly, but we got by. After he passed, Mama and I tried to make do on what I could earn sewing and taking in laundry, but it was never enough. The rent kept rising and we kept falling behind. I saw an advertisement for brides wanted in Texas, and it seemed like an answer to prayer. Was it an answer to prayer? She looked at him, at his serious face and steady eyes. I think it might be. They finished preparing the stew together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Felicity with its naturalness. Ezra showed her where he kept his supplies, apologizing for the haphazard organization, and she made mental notes about how she might improve things. When the stew was bubbling on the stove, filling the kitchen with savory smells, he led her outside to show her the rest of the property. The barn housed 4 horses, including the 2 that had pulled the wagon, and Ezra introduced her to each one with the same care he might give to human acquaintances. There were chickens pecking around a coop, a milk cow in a small paddock, and a pig that grunted at them from the shade of a shelter. It was a well-run operation, and Felicity found herself impressed by what he had built. "You did all this yourself?" she asked as they walked back toward the house, Buttons trotting ahead of them. "Had help with the building, hired a crew from town, but the rest, yes, it has been just me." He glanced at her sideways. "Gets lonely sometimes, talking to cows and horses." "I imagine it does." She hesitated, then said, "I have been lonely too these past years, watching Mama struggle and knowing I could not fix it, working myself to exhaustion just to fall further behind. I felt very alone, even in a city full of people." "Not alone anymore," Ezra said quietly. "None of us are." Supper was ready by the time they got back inside, and Felicity went up to wake her mother. Martha came down looking more rested, though still pale and drawn, and Ezra seated her at the table with the same grave courtesy he had shown since their arrival. They ate together, the 3 of them and Buttons begging scraps under the table, and Felicity felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. This could work. This strange arrangement, this leap into the unknown, it could actually work. After the meal, Martha insisted on helping with the dishes despite Felicity's protests, and Ezra went out to tend to the evening chores. When the kitchen was clean, the 2 women sat together at the table, cups of tea between them. "He is a good man," Martha said softly. "I can see it in him, Felicity. You did well." "I did desperately, Mama. I had no idea what I was getting us into. But it has turned out well, has it not? He did not turn us away. He has a good home, good land, and he looks at you with kind eyes." Martha reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I know this is not how you imagined your life would be, but perhaps it will be better than anything we could have imagined back in Boston." "Perhaps," Felicity agreed. She thought of Ezra's quiet strength, the way he had accepted their presence without anger or complaint, and felt that flutter in her stomach again. "I hope so, Mama. I truly do." The first weeks at the ranch passed in a blur of activity as Felicity and Martha settled into their new life. The house had not known a woman's touch in some time, and there was much to be done. Felicity threw herself into the work, scrubbing and sweeping, airing out rooms, washing curtains and linens until everything smelled of soap and sunshine instead of dust and neglect. Martha, for her part, took over the kitchen garden, coaxing life back into the neglected beds, planting late summer vegetables and herbs that would see them through the fall. Ezra watched all this activity with something like wonder, and more than once Felicity caught him standing in a doorway, just observing the transformed state of his home. He never said much, but his appreciation showed in small ways. He brought wildflowers in from the pastures and left them on the kitchen table. He fixed a broken step on the back porch that Martha had mentioned was dangerous. He came in for meals on time and always thanked them for the food, even though Felicity suspected he had been eating cold beans out of a can for months before they arrived. They had not yet had a wedding, and Ezra made no move to claim husbandly privileges, for which Felicity was grateful and, as the days went by, strangely disappointed. He slept in the back bedroom and she in her small room and Martha in the front, and they lived like a family of friendly strangers, polite and careful with one another. But things were changing, slowly but surely. Felicity found herself watching Ezra when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way his shoulders filled out his work shirts, the competent strength in his hands when he handled the horses, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something altogether more approachable. She began to time her trips to the barn to coincide with his chores, making excuses to bring him water or cookies she had baked, just for the chance to talk with him. For his part, Ezra seemed to be doing the same. He started coming in earlier from the range, finding reasons to linger in the house, helping her carry water for the laundry, mending fence posts near the garden where Martha worked so he could exchange pleasantries with both women. His eyes followed Felicity when she moved around the kitchen, and sometimes when their hands brushed, passing a plate or a tool, he would let the contact last a moment longer than strictly necessary. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Ezra appeared at supper with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, setting down his fork. "We should get married proper. I mean, that was the arrangement, and I do not want folks in town thinking poorly of you ladies, living out here with a man who is not kin." Felicity's heart jumped into her throat. "Of course. When were you thinking?" "Sunday, if that suits. The preacher comes through Austin once a month, and he will be there this week. We could go into town, have the ceremony, maybe get some supplies while we are there." He looked between Felicity and Martha. "That is, if you are still willing, Felicity. I know we have not had much chance to get properly acquainted." "I am willing," Felicity said, and found that she meant it with her whole heart. These weeks of living under the same roof had shown her that Ezra was decent and hardworking, patient and kind. She could do far worse than marry such a man. More than that, she was beginning to suspect she could hardly do better. Sunday dawned clear and hot, and Felicity dressed with shaking hands in the one good dress she had saved for special occasions, a soft green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Martha helped her pin up her hair and lent her a cameo brooch that had belonged to Felicity's grandmother. When she came downstairs, Ezra was waiting in the front room wearing a clean white shirt and dark jacket, his hair still damp from washing. He looked up as she descended, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They rode into town in the wagon, Martha between them as before, but this time Ezra's hand found Felicity's on the bench seat and held it gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. She thought she might die from the sweetness of it, this small intimacy, this promise of things to come. The church in Austin was a simple white building with a cross on the steeple, and the preacher was a round-faced man named Reverend Collins, who seemed delighted to be performing a wedding. There were no guests except Martha and a few curious townspeople who had come for regular services, and stayed when they heard there would be a ceremony. Felicity did not mind. She stood beside Ezra in front of the altar, her hand in his, and repeated the vows that would bind them together for life. "I, Felicity Turner, take you, Ezra Yates, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Ezra's voice was steady when he spoke his own vows, his eyes never leaving her face. "I, Ezra Yates, take you, Felicity Turner, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and Ezra bent to kiss her, a brief, chaste press of lips that nonetheless sent heat flooding through Felicity's entire body. When he pulled back, she saw something in his eyes that matched the feeling in her own chest, a wanting that went beyond duty or convenience. They signed the marriage certificate, and Martha hugged them both with tears streaming down her face. And then they were out in the bright sunlight, married, bound together by law and before God. Ezra kept hold of Felicity's hand as they walked back to the wagon, and she felt lighter than she had in years, as if some burden she had been carrying had finally been set down. They stopped at the general store to purchase supplies, and the proprietor, a friendly man named Mr. Henderson, congratulated them on their marriage and gave them a tin of fancy tea as a wedding present. Martha went off to examine bolts of fabric, and Felicity found herself alone with Ezra among the shelves of goods. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that the other customers would not hear. "I am," she said honestly. "Are you?" "Happier than I expected to be when I sent that advertisement east." He picked up a sack of flour and added it to the growing pile of supplies. "I thought I was getting a housekeeper who would tolerate my company. Instead, I got a wife I cannot stop thinking about and a family to fill up all that empty space." Felicity felt warmth spread through her chest. "I cannot stop thinking about you either," she admitted. "It has been distracting, trying to cook and clean when all I want to do is find excuses to be near you." Ezra's hand found hers again, his fingers lacing through hers. "Tonight," he said simply, and the promise in that single word made her shiver despite the heat. The ride home seemed to take forever and no time at all. Martha, bless her, claimed exhaustion as soon as they arrived and retreated to her bedroom, leaving Ezra and Felicity alone in the house that was now truly theirs together. They put away the supplies in a silence thick with anticipation, moving around each other in the kitchen like dancers who had practiced these steps for years. When the last item was stored away, Ezra turned to Felicity and held out his hand. "Come with me." She took his hand and let him lead her upstairs, past Martha's closed door, past the small room that had been hers, to the back bedroom where he had been sleeping. It was neat and spare, with a large bed covered in the same kind of handmade quilt that graced the other rooms, and windows that looked out over the darkening land. "I know we are married now," Ezra said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "But if you need more time, if you are not ready, I will wait." "I do not want you to feel obligated." Felicity reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I am your wife," she said softly, "and I want to be your wife in every way. I am ready, Ezra." He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss of the church, but something deeper, hungrier, and Felicity met him with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing against his. His hands moved to her waist, then up her back, finding the buttons of her dress, and she helped him, suddenly desperate to feel his skin against hers. They came together in the big bed as the sun set outside the windows, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, and Felicity discovered that the flutters in her stomach had been only the beginning of what she could feel for this man. Ezra was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs, and when she cried out in pleasure, he swallowed the sound with his mouth on hers, his body moving with hers in a rhythm as old as time. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, and Felicity rested her head on Ezra's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she felt utterly content, utterly at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the dimness. She had not meant to say it, had not planned the words, but they felt right and true. Ezra's hand stilled for a moment, then resumed its gentle movement. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stage, looking so fierce and frightened at the same time. I was terrified you would send us away. I could never have done that, not once I saw you." He shifted so he could look down at her, his dark eyes serious. "You are the answer to every prayer I did not know how to say, Felicity Yates." She smiled at the name, her new name, and kissed him again. They made love a second time, slower, exploring each other with hands and mouths, learning what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp and tremble. When they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Felicity thought that she had never been happier, never felt more perfectly where she was meant to be. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern that felt like a dance, each of them learning their steps, finding their rhythm. Felicity woke each morning in Ezra's arms and started the day with a kiss before rising to make breakfast. Martha took over most of the kitchen duties, insisting that the newlyweds needed time together, and Felicity found herself spending more time outdoors, helping Ezra with the ranch work. He taught her to ride, putting her up on a gentle mare named Daisy and walking beside her until she found her balance. She was terrified at first, so high off the ground, the horse's movements unpredictable beneath her, but Ezra's steady presence calmed her, and soon she was cantering across the pastures with the wind in her hair, laughing with the sheer joy of it. She learned to help with the cattle, to move them from one pasture to another, to spot when an animal was ailing and needed attention. Ezra was patient with her questions, explaining the workings of the ranch, teaching her to read the sky for signs of weather, to understand the patterns of the land. She had never imagined that she could love this life, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, but she found herself falling in love with the wide open spaces, the harsh beauty of the Texas landscape, the satisfaction of hard physical work. Martha, too, was thriving. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she moved with more energy than Felicity had seen in years. The garden flourished under her care, producing tomatoes and beans, squash and peppers, and she canned and preserved everything, filling the pantry shelves with jars that glowed like jewels in the lamplight. She baked bread every other day, filling the house with the smell of yeast and warmth, and experimented with recipes using the wild herbs she found growing on the property. In the evenings, the three of them would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills, and Buttons would lie at their feet, content and lazy from a day of chasing rabbits. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their lives before this, making plans for the future. Ezra spoke of expanding the herd, maybe breeding horses more seriously, and Felicity suggested they might plant an orchard, apple and peach trees that would bear fruit in years to come. But the greatest joy was the nights, when Ezra would lead Felicity upstairs to their bedroom and close the door on the rest of the world. They made love with increasing confidence and creativity, learning each other's bodies, finding new ways to bring pleasure. Ezra was an attentive lover, always making sure Felicity found her release before seeking his own, and she grew bold in her own explorations, discovering that she could make this strong, quiet man groan and tremble with her touch. They talked in the darkness after, sharing secrets and dreams. Ezra told her about growing up in Kansas, the son of a farmer who had lost everything to drought and debt. How he had come to Texas with nothing but a horse and a determination to build something that could not be taken away. Felicity told him about her childhood, the happy years before her father's death, the fear and uncertainty that had followed, the desperation that had led her to answer his advertisement. "I am glad you were desperate," Ezra said one night, pulling her close against his side. "If you had not been, you might never have come, and I would still be alone in this house, talking to cows." "The cows are probably more sensible than I am," Felicity replied, her fingers tracing the muscles of his chest. "The cows do not make me feel like my heart is going to burst when I look at them." He kissed the top of her head. "You do." Fall came to Austin with cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the brown landscape briefly green. The cattle were fat and healthy, and Ezra made the decision to sell some of the older steers at market, which meant a trip to San Antonio with the herd. He debated taking Felicity with him, but the journey would be rough and the work hard, and in the end, he decided to hire 2 hands from town and leave her at home with Martha. "I will be gone a week, maybe 10 days," he said the morning he left, holding her close in the pre-dawn darkness. "You will be all right. We will be fine," Felicity assured him, though her heart ached at the thought of so many days without him. "You be careful and come home safe to me, always." He kissed her, long and deep, then pulled away before he could change his mind and stay. Felicity stood on the porch and watched him ride out with the 2 hired men, driving the cattle ahead of them, until they were just specks on the horizon and then gone entirely. She blinked back tears, feeling foolish for being so emotional over a simple business trip, but Martha came and put an arm around her shoulders. "It is hard, being apart when you are so newly in love," her mother said gently. "But he will be back before you know it, and the reunion will be all the sweeter for the separation." Martha was right, of course, but the days dragged nonetheless. Felicity threw herself into projects around the house, mending and sewing, cleaning things that were already clean. She rode Daisy every day, sometimes ranging far from the house, exploring the property, discovering a creek that ran along the eastern boundary, and a grove of cottonwood trees that would be lovely when they leafed out in spring. On the 5th day, a neighbor came calling, a woman named Sarah Brennan who lived on a ranch about 8 miles to the west. She was perhaps 35, weathered and capable, with laugh lines around her eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. She had heard about Ezra's marriage and wanted to welcome Felicity to the community. "It gets lonely out here," Sarah said over coffee and fresh biscuits in the kitchen. "We women have to stick together, help each other out. You need anything, you send word and I will come. And you do the same for me when I need it." Felicity felt a rush of gratitude for this offer of friendship. "Thank you. I would like that very much." Sarah stayed for several hours, sharing news and gossip from the surrounding ranches, giving advice on everything from dealing with scorpions in the house to the best way to render lard from hog fat. She admired Martha's garden and promised to bring cuttings from her own rose bushes when spring came. By the time she left, Felicity felt less isolated, more connected to the land and the people who lived on it. Ezra returned on the 8th day, riding in at sunset with the hired hands and a satisfied expression on his face. Felicity ran to meet him, and he swept her up in his arms, kissing her right there in front of the other men who grinned and looked away politely. He paid them their wages plus a generous bonus, and they headed back to town while Ezra led Felicity into the house, his arm around her waist, already talking about how well the cattle had sold and what they could do with the money. But business talk could wait. As soon as they were alone in their bedroom, they fell on each other with the hunger of a week's separation, shedding clothes in a trail across the floor, coming together urgently, almost desperately. Afterward, lying tangled and breathless, Ezra held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "Every day, every minute, I kept thinking about you here, and it made the nights unbearable. I missed you too. The house felt empty without you." She kissed his shoulder, his neck, his jaw. "Do not leave me again for so long." "I will do my best to avoid it." He rolled onto his back, pulling her on top of him, his hands running down her sides. "Although if this is the greeting I get when I return, maybe I should go away more often." She swatted at his chest playfully. "Do not even think about it, Ezra Yates." He laughed, a sound she loved to hear because it was still so rare, and kissed her again. And they made love a second time, slowly, savoring each other, relearning what they had been forced to go without. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and occasional frost that killed the last of the garden plants. Martha brought in the final harvest, green tomatoes that she wrapped in newspaper to ripen, the last of the peppers and herbs, and then turned her attention to indoor projects, knitting and sewing, making curtains for the bedroom windows and cushions for the chairs. Felicity worked beside her, grateful for her mother's company, for the easy relationship they had always shared. Christmas came, and they made a celebration of it despite being far from town. Ezra cut a small cedar tree and brought it into the front room, and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Martha cut from old newspapers. Felicity made a special dinner, roasting a chicken and baking pies, and afterward, they exchanged simple gifts. Ezra had bought fabric in San Antonio, beautiful calico in shades of blue and green, and Felicity had knitted him a scarf from wool she had carded and spun herself. Martha received a warm shawl from both of them, and she wept with gratitude, hugging them both. That night, as Felicity lay in Ezra's arms, she realized that she was completely, utterly happy. She had everything she had never dared to hope for: a husband who loved her, a home that was truly hers, a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. The desperation that had driven her to Texas seemed like a lifetime ago, something that had happened to a different woman in a different world. "What are you thinking?" Ezra murmured, his fingers combing through her hair. "That I am blessed beyond measure. That I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. That I am happy." "Good," he said, kissing her forehead. "That is all I want, Felicity, to make you happy, to give you a good life." "You have," she whispered. "You do." The new year of 1880 arrived quietly, with clear skies and cold temperatures that kept them close to the fire. In January, Felicity realized she had missed her monthly courses, and then missed them again in February. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed, but when March came and still there was no sign, she could no longer deny what her body was telling her. She waited until evening, until she and Ezra were alone in their room, and then she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I am with child," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. For a moment he was absolutely still, his hand warm against her through the fabric of her nightgown. Then his eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "Truly," his voice was choked with emotion, "truly. I am perhaps 3 months along, I think. The baby will come in late summer. A baby." He said it like a prayer, like a miracle. "Our baby. Are you happy?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the joy on his face was answer enough. "Happy does not begin to cover it, Felicity. I am overcome. I am undone. I am the most fortunate man alive." They told Martha the next morning, and she cried and laughed and hugged them both, already making plans for knitting baby clothes and preparing a nursery. The small bedroom that had been Felicity's was converted into a space for the baby, painted soft yellow, furnished with a cradle that Ezra built with his own hands from oak wood, rubbed smooth and finished with beeswax. As Felicity's belly grew, Ezra became increasingly protective, not wanting her to overwork, insisting she rest, bringing her small gifts and treats from town. She felt cherished and loved, beautiful even as her body changed and swelled, because Ezra looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The baby moved inside her, small flutters at first and then strong kicks that made her gasp. Ezra would place his hand on her stomach at night, feeling the child move, a look of wonder on his face. They talked about names, arguing playfully over whether the baby would be a boy or a girl, what they would call him or her. "If it is a boy, I want to name him after my father," Ezra said one night. "Edward was his name, Edward James Yates." "Edward is a good, strong name," Felicity agreed. "And if it is a girl you choose, she will be your daughter as much as mine." Felicity thought about it for a long time and finally decided. "Rose Martha Yates for your mother and mine." "Perfect," Ezra said, kissing her swollen belly. "Hello in there, Edward or Rose, we are waiting for you." Summer came hot and fierce, and Felicity grew huge and uncomfortable, her feet swelling, her back aching, sleep difficult to find. Ezra had sent to town for a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Garrett, who came out to the ranch twice to check on Felicity's progress and pronounce her healthy and strong. Sarah Brennan came as well, bringing baby clothes her own children had outgrown and offering advice on childbirth and nursing. The labor began on a sweltering August afternoon, pains low in Felicity's back that she initially dismissed as the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. But they grew stronger and more regular, and by evening she knew it was time. Martha sent Ezra for Mrs. Garrett while she helped Felicity upstairs to the bedroom, got her out of her dress and into a loose nightgown. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Felicity had never known such pain, and there were moments when she thought she could not endure another contraction, another wave of agony. But Martha held her hand and whispered encouragement, and Mrs. Garrett was calm and professional, telling her when to push and when to breathe, and somehow Felicity found the strength to keep going. Ezra paced downstairs, unable to sit still, terrified by the sounds of his wife in pain. Once he tried to come up, but Mrs. Garrett sent him firmly back down, telling him this was women's work and he would only be in the way. He sat on the porch with Buttons beside him, listening to Felicity's cries, feeling helpless and afraid. Finally, in the early afternoon of the second day, a new sound filled the house, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Ezra leaped to his feet and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Mrs. Garrett wrapping a squirming bundle in a soft blanket and Martha wiping tears from her eyes. "A boy," Mrs. Garrett announced with satisfaction. "A fine, healthy boy." Ezra looked past her to the bed, where Felicity lay exhausted and pale but smiling, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes shining with joy. He went to her, knelt beside the bed and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Are you all right?" "I am wonderful," she whispered. "We have a son, Ezra." "We have Edward." Mrs. Garrett placed the baby in Felicity's arms, and Ezra got his first good look at his son. Tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the light. The baby's fist waved in the air, and Ezra caught it with one finger, marveling at the perfection of the miniature hand, the delicate fingernails, the absolute realness of this new person. "He is perfect," Ezra said, his voice breaking. "You are perfect, both of you. Would you like to hold him?" Felicity asked, and carefully transferred the baby into Ezra's arms. Ezra cradled his son with the same care he would give to something infinitely fragile and infinitely precious, because that was exactly what Edward was. The baby made small snuffling sounds and turned his head toward Ezra's chest, rooting for milk he would not find there, and Ezra laughed through his tears. "Hello, Edward," he said softly. "I am your papa. I have been waiting so long to meet you." The days that followed were a blur of feedings and diaper changes, sleepless nights and learning the particular sounds of Edward's cries, which meant hunger, which meant he needed changing, which was just fussiness that could be soothed with rocking. Felicity was exhausted but radiant, her body recovering from the ordeal of childbirth, her heart so full of love for her son that she sometimes thought it might overflow. Ezra was a doting father, eager to help with the baby despite his initial awkwardness. He learned to change diapers and swaddle Edward snugly in blankets, to walk the floor with the baby against his shoulder when Edward fussed in the night. He sang to his son in a low, off-key voice, nonsense songs and cowboy ballads, and Edward would quiet and listen, his dark eyes fixed on his father's face. Martha, too, was besotted with her grandson, holding him every chance she got, making silly faces to coax smiles from the baby, knitting endless tiny garments in soft yarn. The house was filled with the sounds of a baby, crying and cooing and eventually laughing, and Felicity thought she had never heard sweeter music. As Edward grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, active infant, Felicity and Ezra's love for each other deepened and matured. They were partners now in the truest sense, working together to raise their son, to run the ranch, to build the life they both wanted. The passionate heat of their early days had settled into something steadier but no less intense, a connection that went bone deep, that could not be shaken by hardship or challenge. Edward was 6 months old when Felicity realized she was pregnant again, and this time the news was met with equal joy but less surprise. Their second child, a girl they named Rose Martha, was born in the spring of 1881, an easier birth than Edward's had been, as if Felicity's body remembered what to do this time. Rose had her mother's light hair and her father's dark eyes, and she was a calm, contented baby from the start, so different from her brother's fussy infancy. With 2 small children, the house was full to bursting, loud and chaotic and messy and wonderful. Ezra expanded his operations, hiring a permanent ranch hand to help with the work so he could spend more time with his family. The herd grew, the ranch prospered, and they began to build savings, talking about buying more land, about the future that stretched ahead of them. Edward grew into a sturdy, adventurous little boy, always into something, climbing on furniture, chasing the chickens, following his father around the ranch on short, determined legs. Buttons was endlessly patient with him, allowing the toddler to pull his ears and tail, trotting beside him to keep him out of too much trouble. Rose was a calmer child, content to sit in her mother's lap and watch the world go by, her small hand gripping Felicity's finger. Martha's health, which had improved so much in the first years in Texas, began to decline when Rose was about a year old. She tired easily and had a cough that would not go away, and despite Felicity's best efforts with tonics and teas, she grew weaker. The doctor from Austin came and examined her, and took Felicity aside to tell her that her mother's heart was failing, that there was nothing to be done but make her comfortable and wait for the inevitable. Felicity was devastated but tried to hide it from Martha, tried to stay cheerful and hopeful. But Martha was not fooled. She took her daughter's hand one evening and said, "I have had more happiness in these 3 years with you and Ezra and the children than I had in all the years before combined." When I go, I will go grateful and content, knowing you are loved and cared for. Do not talk like that, Mama. You are going to be fine. We both know that is not true, dearest, and that is all right. I am ready. Martha smiled, and there was peace in her eyes. I will get to see your father again, and we will watch over you from wherever we end up. You will not be alone, Felicity. You will have Ezra and the children, and that is more than enough. Martha passed away on a quiet morning in late autumn of 1882, slipping away in her sleep with no pain, no struggle. They buried her in a spot on the ranch that she had loved, under a spreading oak tree with a view of the hills, and the reverend from town came to say the words over her grave. Felicity wept in Ezra's arms, grieving for the woman who had given her life and sacrificed so much for her, but grateful too that Martha had known these years of peace and plenty, that she had seen her grandchildren, and known they would be well cared for. Edward, who was 3, did not fully understand death, but he knew his grandmother was gone and he was sad, his little face solemn at the graveside. Rose, just a year old, was too young to remember, and Felicity felt a pang at that, wishing her daughter could have known Martha better, longer. In the months that followed, Felicity leaned heavily on Ezra, and he was there for her, steady and strong, holding her when she cried, taking on extra duties with the children so she could rest, reminding her gently that Martha had lived to see her daughter happy and her grandchildren thriving, that it was a good life and a good death. Slowly, Felicity's grief eased, not disappearing but becoming something she could carry without being overwhelmed by it. Life went on as it always does. The ranch continued to prosper, and Ezra bought an adjoining piece of land, expanding their holdings. He hired another hand, a young man named Tom who was eager to learn the cattle business, and began to talk about eventually making Tom a partner, building something that could be passed down to Edward when he was grown. Felicity found her own rhythms again, caring for the children, managing the household, keeping the garden that Martha had started. She thought of her mother every day, missing her presence but feeling her influence in everything she did, every recipe she cooked, every plant she tended. Edward turned 4, then 5, growing tall and strong, learning to ride a pony that Ezra bought for him, helping with simple chores around the ranch. Rose grew into a sweet-natured toddler, following her big brother everywhere, trying to keep up with his adventures. And Felicity and Ezra, now parents and partners with years of marriage behind them, loved each other with a depth that had only grown with time. One evening, when Edward was 6 and Rose was 3, Felicity told Ezra she was pregnant again. They were sitting on the porch, watching the children play in the yard with Buttons, who was old now and moved more slowly but still devoted to the family. Ezra looked at her with the same wonder he had shown at the news of their first child and pulled her into his arms. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. "How did I manage to deserve you and all of this? You sent for a mail-order bride and got more than you bargained for," Felicity said with a smile. "A wife, a mother-in-law, and a dog. Best bargain I ever made." He kissed her softly. "The house is big enough for all, remember? Always has been, always will be." Their third child, a boy they named Thomas after Ezra's father, was born in early 1885, another healthy baby who completed their family. With 3 children, the house was truly full, every bedroom occupied, every corner filled with the noise and energy of young life. Buttons passed away peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was about 6 months old, and they buried him under the oak tree near Martha, marking his grave with a small stone. Edward and Rose cried for their beloved dog, and Ezra promised them that when they were a bit older, they could get a puppy to raise. True to his word, Ezra brought home a lively border collie pup the next spring, and the children named him Scout. The dog grew up with Thomas, and the four of them, 3 children and a dog, became a pack of their own, ranging over the ranch under Felicity and Ezra's watchful eyes, learning the land and the animals, growing strong and confident and loved. The years passed in a blur of seasons, of planting and harvest, of cattle drives and horse training, of children growing and changing, losing teeth and gaining height, learning to read and write and ride and rope. Edward showed a natural talent for working with the horses, and by the time he was 10, he was helping Ezra break the young ones to saddle. Rose was quieter, more studious, and Felicity taught her to read from the small collection of books they owned, delighting in her daughter's quick mind and love of stories. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into scrapes, coming home muddy and torn and grinning, full of tales of his adventures. Felicity and Ezra grew older together, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by sun and laughter, but their love for each other never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared trials and triumphs, by the family they had built together, by the life they had made from nothing. One evening, when Edward was 15 and Rose 12 and Thomas 10, Ezra came in from the range and found Felicity sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. He sat down beside her and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in the gesture that had become so familiar over the years. "Do you remember the day you arrived?" he asked quietly. "Standing there in the street with your mother and that dog, looking like you expected me to send you away." "I remember," Felicity said. "I was terrified. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change. I just did not know how much." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You brought love into this house, Felicity. You and Martha and even old Buttons. You filled up all the empty spaces and made this place a home." "You did the same for us," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You gave us a place to belong, a future we never could have had otherwise. You loved us when you had every right to turn us away." "The house was big enough for all," Ezra said, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago. "And it always will be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky, listening to the sounds of their children inside the house, laughing and arguing over some game. Scout barked once, a happy sound, and from the barn, one of the horses whinnied. The land stretched out around them, familiar and beloved, marked with the work of their hands and the passage of their years. Felicity thought about the desperate young woman she had been, stepping off that stage with nothing but hope and fear, and the woman she had become: wife, mother, rancher, beloved. She thought about Martha, resting under the oak tree and Buttons beside her, and all the love that had been shared in this place. She thought about the future, about Edward taking over the ranch one day, about Rose finding her own path, about Thomas growing up to be whoever he was meant to be. She thought about grandchildren she would someday hold, about the legacy she and Ezra were building together. "I love you," she said to her husband, the words as true as they had been the first time she had spoken them, as true as they would be the last. "I love you too," Ezra replied, his arm around her shoulders, solid and sure. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, Felicity felt a deep sense of contentment, of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The mail-order bride who had arrived with her mother and her dog had found more than a husband or a home. She had found a life worth living, a love worth cherishing, and a family that would endure long after she was gone, rooted in this Texas soil like the oak trees, strong and lasting and true. The years continued to unfold with the predictable rhythm of ranch life, mixed with the unpredictable joys and sorrows that come to all families. Edward grew into a tall, capable young man, the image of his father in both looks and temperament, steady and hardworking with a gift for understanding animals. When he was 17, he began courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner, a sweet-natured young woman named Anna who fit into the family as if she had always belonged. Rose, at 14, was already showing signs of the beauty she would become, but more than that, she had a quick intellect that Felicity encouraged at every turn. She had taught her daughter everything she knew, and then Ezra had hired a tutor from Austin to come once a week, a retired schoolteacher who recognized Rose's potential and pushed her to read widely, to think critically, to question and explore. Thomas, at 12, was still all energy and mischief, but beginning to show interest in the business side of the ranch, asking Ezra questions about prices and markets, about buying and selling, about how to build something that would last. Ezra was patient with all his children, teaching them what they needed to know, trusting them with real responsibilities as they proved themselves ready. The ranch itself had grown into one of the most successful operations in the area, with nearly 1,000 head of cattle and a growing reputation for the quality of horses they bred and trained. Ezra had made Tom, the hired hand from years ago, a full partner, and together they managed the day-to-day operations while Ezra spent more time with his family, knowing that his legacy was secure in capable hands. One spring evening in 1890, when Edward was 20 and preparing for his own wedding to Anna, Felicity sat with her eldest son on the porch and talked about marriage and love and the future. "Your father and I had an unusual beginning," she told him, not for the first time, but Edward never seemed to tire of the story. "I came here with nothing but hope and desperation, bringing Grandma Martha and Buttons along because I could not bear to leave them behind. Your father could have sent us away, and no one would have blamed him, but he did not. He said the house was big enough for all, and he meant it. He is a good man," Edward said simply. "The best I have ever known. I want to be the kind of husband to Anna that he has been to you." Felicity's eyes filled with tears, the good kind, the proud kind. "Then be honest with her, be patient, be willing to work through the hard times and celebrate the good ones. Love her not just in words but in actions every single day. That is what your father has done for me, and it has made all the difference." Edward hugged his mother, this young man who had once been the tiny baby in her arms, and promised he would do his best. The wedding a few weeks later was a joyous occasion, held at the ranch with half the county in attendance, and Felicity watched her son exchange vows with Anna and felt the bittersweet ache of seeing him begin his own life, his own family. But Edward and Anna did not go far. They built a small house on the ranch property, close enough to be part of the family operation but far enough to have privacy. And Edward continued to work alongside his father and Tom, learning everything he would need to know to eventually take over. Anna fit seamlessly into the family, helping Felicity with the household work, bringing her own skills and energy to the ranch. Within a year, Anna was pregnant, and Felicity found herself preparing to become a grandmother. The thought was strange and wonderful all at once, a reminder of how much time had passed and how much life had been lived. When Anna gave birth to a healthy baby boy in the summer of 1891, naming him Ezra after his grandfather, Felicity held her first grandchild and felt the circle completing itself, the generations linking hands across time. Ezra the elder was enchanted with his namesake, spending hours holding the baby, making the same silly faces and singing the same off-key songs he had once sung to his own children. Felicity watched her husband with their grandson and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the tenderness he had always possessed, but that age and experience had mellowed and deepened. Rose, at 16, had become a striking young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. She had begun talking about wanting to go to a women's college back east, to study literature and history. And while the thought of her daughter so far away frightened Felicity, she and Ezra were determined to support her dreams. They had been saving money for years, and when Rose was 17, they sent her to a respected school in Massachusetts, trusting that the education and experience would serve her well. Letters flew back and forth between Texas and Massachusetts, Rose writing long, detailed accounts of her classes and her new friends, her discoveries and challenges, and Felicity writing back with news of the ranch, of Edward and Anna and baby Ezra, of Thomas and his latest adventures. The separation was hard, but Felicity was proud of her daughter for pursuing her own path, for not settling for the limited options available to women in a small Texas town. Thomas, at 15, was beginning to court a neighbor girl, much to his parents' amusement and slight concern. He was young yet, but Ezra remembered being that age and feeling the pull of attraction, and he sat his youngest son down for a serious conversation about respecting women and taking responsibility for one's actions. Thomas listened with unusual gravity, and Felicity saw glimpses of the man he would become, serious and thoughtful beneath the boyish energy. As the years of the 1890s progressed, Felicity and Ezra settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle age, their children grown or nearly so, their grandchildren beginning to arrive. Edward and Anna had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, and the ranch rang with the sound of young voices once more. Rose came home from college with a degree and a burning desire to open a school for girls in Austin, and Felicity and Ezra helped her finance the project, bursting with pride at their daughter's ambition and achievement. Thomas, at 20, married his childhood sweetheart in a simple ceremony at the ranch and took over the day-to-day management of the horse breeding operation, proving to have inherited his father's gift with the animals. He and his wife, Caroline, built their own house on the property, and soon there were more grandchildren, more life and love spreading across the land that Ezra and Felicity had claimed as their own so many years before. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Felicity and Ezra sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the hills. They were both in their 50s now, graying and weathered but still strong, still vital, still deeply in love. Around them, the ranch they had built together thrived, 3 generations of family living and working on the land, carrying forward the legacy that had started with a desperate mail-order bride and a lonely cowboy. "You ever regret it?" Felicity asked suddenly, voicing a question that had been on her mind. "Taking us in that day, saying the house was big enough for all, your life would have been simpler without us, certainly quieter." Ezra turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was answer enough before he even spoke. "Not for one single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Felicity. You and Martha and even old Buttons, you brought life into this place. You made it worth building, worth fighting for, worth everything. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over and count myself lucky every time." Felicity leaned over and kissed him, softly and sweetly, the kiss of a woman who knows she is loved and cherished. "I am the lucky one," she whispered. "I came here with nothing and you gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Ezra corrected. He stood and pulled her to her feet, taking her in his arms and swaying gently to music only they could hear. "We built this together, you and I, every bit of it." They danced in the fading light, two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other, their lives woven together so tightly that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, the cattle bedding down, the horses dozing in their stalls, the chickens roosting for the night. In the houses scattered across the property, their children tucked their own children into bed, kissed their spouses good night, lived the lives that Felicity and Ezra had made possible. Inside the main house, the one Ezra had built all those years ago expecting to fill it with a family, photo frames lined the mantel and walls. Pictures of Martha smiling in the garden, of Button sitting proudly on the porch, of Edward and Rose and Thomas at various ages, gap-toothed and sunburned and happy. Pictures of weddings and babies, of cattle drives and Christmas celebrations, of a life lived fully and well. The house had indeed been big enough for all, and more besides. It had held love and laughter, grief and joy, birth and death, all the messy, beautiful complexity of a family building a life together. It had sheltered Martha in her final years and welcomed Anna and Caroline and the grandchildren. It had been a haven and a home, a place where people could be themselves and know they were accepted, where love was not conditional but freely given and received. As full darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Felicity and Ezra finally went inside, climbing the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for so many years. They prepared for bed with the comfortable familiarity of long marriage, helping each other with buttons and hairpins, exchanging quiet comments about the day, making plans for tomorrow. When they lay down together, Ezra pulled Felicity close against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, their bodies fitting together perfectly after so many years of practice. They talked quietly about Edward's plans to expand the cattle operation, about Rose's school which was thriving and had a waiting list of students, about Thomas's latest horse sale which had brought a remarkable price. They talked about their grandchildren, about how fast they were growing, about the future that seemed so bright and full of promise. "I want to grow old with you," Felicity said softly into the darkness. "Right here in this house, watching our family grow and thrive." "That is exactly what we will do," Ezra promised. "We will grow old together, surrounded by the people we love in the home we built. And when our time comes, we will rest under that oak tree with your mama and know that we lived well and loved well and left something good behind." "It has been a good life," Felicity murmured, sleep beginning to claim her. "The best," Ezra agreed, kissing the top of her head. "The very best." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had taken a chance on love and found more than they had ever dreamed possible. Outside, the Texas night settled over the ranch, peaceful and quiet, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, the land resting until morning when the work would begin again. The years continued to pass, gentle and kind to Felicity and Ezra. They watched their grandchildren grow up, saw some of them marry and start families of their own, making them great-grandparents before they had fully adjusted to being grandparents at all. The ranch prospered under Edward's management, and Thomas's horse breeding program gained regional fame, people coming from as far as San Antonio and Dallas to purchase his animals. Rose's school became an institution in Austin, educating generations of young women, many of whom went on to attend university or pursue careers that would have been unthinkable when Felicity was young. Rose herself never married, content with her work and her family, often coming home on weekends to spend time at the ranch, to ride the old trails with her father, to sit with her mother and talk about books and ideas and the changing world. In their 60s, Felicity and Ezra slowed down but did not stop. They still walked the property together every evening when weather permitted, still sat on the porch and watched the sunsets, still held hands and stole kisses when they thought no one was looking. Their children and grandchildren would smile when they caught sight of them. These two old people still so clearly in love, still choosing each other every day. On the 20th anniversary of Martha's death, the family gathered at the ranch for a memorial. They stood under the oak tree where Martha and Buttons were buried, and Felicity told the younger grandchildren about the grandmother and the dog they had never known, about how Martha had been brave enough to cross the country with her daughter, how Buttons had been a faithful companion through uncertain times. Grandma Martha told me before she died that she had been happier in her years here than in all the years before, Felicity said, her voice steady though her eyes were damp. She got to see me loved and cared for, got to meet some of you, got to live in peace and plenty after years of struggle. That was her gift, and it came from your grandfather's generous heart when he said the house was big enough for all. Young Ezra, Edward's eldest son, who was now a young man of 15, spoke up. "Tell us again, Grandma, about the day you arrived. About how scared you were, and how Grandpa just accepted you all without question." So Felicity told the story once more, as she had told it countless times over the years, and it never got old, never lost its power to move her. She told about stepping off the stage with her mother and their dog, about expecting rejection and finding acceptance, about Ezra's simple words that had changed everything. "The house is big enough for all," she repeated, looking at the man who had spoken those words so long ago, who stood now with his arm around her, his hair white and his face lined, but his eyes still the same dark, steady presence she had fallen in love with. "And it has been. For all of us, for everyone who has come into this family, there has always been room. That is your grandfather's legacy, and I hope you will carry it forward. Always make room for love, for family, for those who need a place to belong." There was not a dry eye under the oak tree, and afterward they went back to the house for a meal together. 4 generations gathered around the expanded table, passing food and conversation, children running between the rooms, Scout the Third, descendant of the original Scout, begging for scraps under the table. Felicity looked around at all the faces, at the life and love that filled her home, and felt profoundly grateful. That night, as had become their custom on special occasions, the extended family gathered on the porch and the lawn, and someone brought out a fiddle, and there was music and dancing. Felicity and Ezra swayed together slowly, not attempting the more energetic steps of their youth but content with simple closeness. And around them, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren celebrated the family that had begun with a mail-order bride and a cowboy's kindness. As the evening wound down and people began to head to their own homes scattered across the ranch property, Felicity and Ezra stood at the porch rail and watched them go, calling out good nights and see you tomorrows, waving until the last lantern disappeared in the darkness. "We did well," Ezra said quietly, his arm around Felicity's waist. "We did," she agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They went inside to their quiet house, the house that had held so much life over the years, and climbed the stairs to their bedroom one more time. As they settled into bed, Felicity thought about all the nights they had spent in this room, all the conversations and caresses, the tears and laughter, the children conceived here, the dreams shared in the darkness. It had been a good life, better than good. It had been extraordinary in its ordinariness, remarkable in its simple joys and steady love. "I love you, Ezra Yates," she whispered, as she had whispered so many times before. "I love you, Felicity Yates," he replied, as he always had, as he always would. "From the day you stepped off that stage until the day I draw my last breath, I love you." They fell asleep together, as they had for more than 40 years, and their dreams were peaceful and sweet, filled with memories of the past and hope for the future, gratitude for every moment they had been given, every person they had loved, every blessing that had come from a simple decision to open a door and let love in. The house stood solid and strong around them, sheltering not just two old people but the legacy of their love, a legacy that would endure in their children and grandchildren, in the land they had worked and the home they had built, in the story that would be told for generations to come about the mail-order bride who brought her mother and her dog, and the cowboy who said the house was big enough for all, and meant it with his whole heart. And as the Texas stars wheeled overhead and the gentle night wind whispered through the mesquite trees, the ranch rested in peace, a testament to what can be built when kindness meets courage, when need meets generosity, when two hearts find each other across distance and circumstance and choose love, again and again and again, every day for a lifetime.